Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. In my show, I'll tell you about the wild birds I've seen, speak with other enthusiasts, take bird walks, and share stories from listeners around the world. In episode 82, I share my bird experiences during the second lockdown in England in November 2020, and hear your sightings and recordings too. But first, I want to say how much I appreciate you and those who regularly give the Casual Birder podcast a shout out on social media. Particular thanks go to David Fowler, Ewan Buchan, the Edinburgh Birdwatcher, Steve from Sharp Podcast, Oracle of Dusk on Instagram, who's been listening to my back catalogue and sharing the episodes in their Instagram stories. And also many thanks to the members of the show's Facebook group and those on Twitter and Instagram who take part in What Bird Wednesday and tell me their top 5 birds or bird moments each week. And thanks especially to Gustavo Zolads and Andrew Weidman, who've provided me with their beautiful bird photographs to use for future What Bird Wednesday quizzes. All of this engagement attracts attention and helps others to find the show. I appreciate you all for listening, and if you would like to give additional support, you can do so by telling people on social media or in real life about the latest episode you enjoyed. Tag me in any posts so that I can share the recommendation. You could write a review of the show or of a favourite episode on podchaser.com. Or you could make a donation to the show by buying me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. Ko-fi works like having a tip jar. If you find value in what I do and would like to help support the show's production, you can buy me a virtual coffee. The link is in the show notes. And a very, very big thanks to Kieran for buying me my first coffees. For most of November, England was under a second lockdown, implemented to help control the spread of the coronavirus. People were told to stay at home unless going to school or to do work that couldn't be done from home. The weather during the month was often stormy, so I didn't leave the house much, although I did manage one walk at Old Down Park, an area of open chalk grassland with some woodland that's a short distance from my home. The morning of the walk was cold and foggy, but mostly calm. After we'd been out a couple of hours, the sun came out and provided us with vibrant views of the sloes, rosehips and berries on the bushes that were edging the farm fields. I saw 24 species that morning. In addition to the birds that are often also seen in my garden, I saw ringneck pheasant, jay, common buzzard, common chaffinch, Eurasian bullfinch, pied wagtail, also known as white wagtail, and the biggest surprise of all, yellowhammer. I honestly had no idea that I would find yellowhammers so close to home, and I must give a shout out to my husband for spotting them. For the rest of November, I spent my observing time watching my garden birds. My routine was, when it got light, I check the hanging feeders, refill the ground feeding trays, and put out fresh water, and then conduct a breakfast birdwatch from my bedroom window. During the day, I work at my dining room table, and I take time to look out at the feeders and see what the birds are up to. I also listen out for my rook friend. It's visited most days, but its schedule is varied, and if it rains heavily, it doesn't visit me at all. Occasionally, it'll sit on the roof opposite and chatter and call, but mostly I just hear the 2-note call when it arrives, which is my cue to go to the back door with the suet pellet treats. A couple of times a robin and a female blackbird have hopped out of the shrubs to take advantage of the extra suet pellets while the rook is feeding. Over the last month, a jackdaw has started coming to the garden. It first started arriving around the same time as the rook, but now it spends time in the garden on its own. I normally think of jackdaws as being quite perky, with their jaunty walk. This particular individual does not look unwell, but it walks with quite a slow pace, checking out the food that's outside. If I throw out some nuts, it'll hop over quickly to grab them, but then it eats them quite slowly and deliberately. In the last few weeks, I've been putting out peanuts in shells. I've been noticing how the different members of the corvid family that visit my garden eat them. A quick observation about how different birds eat the peanuts in shells that I put out. So the magpies love them. They generally don't eat them in the garden. They swoop in, grab them, take them off. I have seen them bury them in the garden, but I'm guessing they're caching them elsewhere as well. Jackdaws will come in and, usually as a raiding party, swoop down to the bird table and pick up a nut and fly off with it almost without stopping. It's quite spectacular to see. But when they do stop, I've got one in the garden right now, he'll hold the nut between his feet, and they take quite a long time to break it open, and then when it can get the nut out, it eats the nut very carefully and gently, so it breaks tiny pieces off to eat at a time, which is quite different from how I would have expected them to eat the nuts. Rooks don't seem to be interested in the peanuts in shells at all. A carrion crow has been coming to the garden when I've put nuts on the bird table, when it can't see me, because they're very shy in my garden. It will stay on the bird table and put the nut in the corner of the dish and peck at the shell until he's broken open the nut and then take the nuts out, but with quite violent pecks at the nut to open it. Despite the dreary and stormy weather, which usually means long periods without good bird sightings, there have been a few other notable moments in my garden this month. I've seen a wren fairly regularly hanging around the ivy that's growing over a wooden arch. The ivy is quite thick and maybe is deep enough for a nest next year. Earlier this week, the wren was calling out loudly with its scolding call, and I looked up from my computer to see it hopping along the top of the fence just a few feet away. I really hope it's going to remain around. While putting out the hedgehog food this past week, I heard 2 tawny owls calling out in the distance, a rare treat for me. And one morning, 14 long-tailed tits flew through the garden, some of them stopping briefly as they did so. I heard their high-pitched calls and looked out to see if they were in the garden. They were clearly nearby, as the calls were getting louder and louder. 1 or 2 flew across my garden, noticeable by their shape, looking like a sideways lollipop, with their tiny bill, round body and long tail, and that undulating flight. As they passed through, another few followed, and then some more. A couple stopped briefly in various plants as they travelled through, but flocks generally stay together, and so they didn't stop for long. I do love those occasions when a flock stops by to feed, and the garden will be alive with their calls and the flittering shapes as they restlessly move from one feeder or plant to another. The red-legged partridge has visited a few times, but there can be several days between visits. It's clearly made itself at home in the neighbourhood. I noticed it make a really strange manoeuvre the other day. It was eating the chopped peanuts and suet pellets that I'd put out for the rook, and suddenly, for no apparent reason, it ran quickly backwards for a few steps. The wall stopped it from running any further, and I think its tail got a bit squashed, and then it just started walking forward again with no apparent concern. I've seen chickens scratching earth and walking backwards while doing so, but I don't think I've ever seen a bird running backwards. If any of you have an explanation for this behaviour, do let me know. One morning, I noticed 2 jackdaws sitting close together on the roof opposite. I then realised that one was preening the other, and I managed to get some video of this jackdaw pair, which I'll put on my YouTube channel. It was quite heartwarming to see a pair of birds together, and made me think of the spring, which is not too far away. On that note, 2 great tits have been checking out my nest box. One even went inside. I don't know whether they're using it as a nighttime roost over winter, but maybe they're noting it as a location for next year's nest. I really should put on the nest cam and find out if they're inside overnight, but the reason I don't is there's so much interference on the webcam feed that it doesn't really make for a great viewing experience. I have 2 robins using the garden at the moment, and I think they're a pair as they tolerate each other's presence. Normally robins are very territorial, which they are with regard to the dunnocks that also live in the garden. They're really not so tolerant of them, and there are plenty of instances where a robin chases a dunnock away from the feeders. There was even a mid-air clash between a robin and a dunnock the other day, but it was over quite quickly. I've been enjoying the robin's song, which is particularly noticeable on sunny days. And talking of bird calls and songs, each evening recently, as dusk falls, the local blackbirds have been calling out an alarm. I've gone out in the garden a few times to check what's going on, but I can't see anything to upset them. Once the alarm call is made, you can hear blackbirds all over the neighbourhood joining the call, and sometimes magpies will join in. So maybe it's not an alarm and it's just a, hey everyone, I'm going to bed, let me know if there's a problem kind of call. Guess what? I bought a mini bird hide. It's a folding chair with a kind of tent attached, with several zip openings and enough space in front of the chair to place a tripod and a camera. On the day I tried it out, it was a little foggy and quite cold outside. I sat on my deck about 6 feet away from the feeder pole. I tried to place myself out of sight of my neighbour's windows because I felt a bit embarrassed sitting in my garden in it. The birds weren't really around much because it was such a cold, foggy morning, but a dunnock did turn up at the feeder for a few seconds. Not long enough for me to photograph it, though. I don't think it was scared by the hide. It was just a bad day for bird activity. I ended up sitting outside for over 3 hours, with my hot coffee, hot water bottle, and a blankie on my lap. I was quite cosy. All I needed was some birds to show up. Because of the bad weather during November, I've only used it once so far. I'm really looking forward to trying it out properly on a calm day, and I hope to take it away on our vacations within the UK. I'll likely only ever use it in a garden setting. I'd feel too vulnerable sitting out in the countryside in it. But I know a couple of you also have portable hides for bird and wildlife watching, so I'd love to hear your experiences. While I kept eBird lists of my garden bird watches over the month, I've realised that I really should keep some sort of diary to log the observations that I make. I'm sure that, to many of you, it will sound strange that I don't do that already. I've been keeping verbal records and sound recordings to share with you, but writing down my observations will give me the opportunity to note changes in the behaviours and the types of species visiting my garden during a year that isn't really recorded on the eBird records. So I'm going to keep a notebook by my bedroom window, as that's the main place I make my observations. And it's a good excuse to get a new notebook. In fact, shameless plug alert, I've opened a store at redbubble.com where you can buy all sorts of products with the Casual Birder podcast artwork on. I just bought a couple of Casual Birder notebooks, along with a face mask and some coasters, so I'll use one of those notebooks. If you buy any products from the Casual Birder store at redbubble.com, do post a photo and tag me. I'd love to see what you got. Early in November, I was in the garden one night putting out food for the hedgehogs, and I could hear some infrequent high-pitched bird calls. At first, I thought it was dunnocks calling, or maybe blackbirds making their high-pitched warning call. But as it was night time, this seemed unlikely, and they were coming from different parts of the sky, so I had a feeling they were flying over. They were very infrequent, and some louder, some quieter. I had a suspicion of what they might be, so I brought my sound recorder outside and left it running for a few minutes. When I'd processed the files, cutting out all the traffic noise and isolating the frequencies of the calls, I ran it through BirdNet, and it confirmed my suspicion. Redwings on migration. I corroborated my calls with those on zenocanto.org, the website that holds recordings of birds all around the world. Here's the recording. I've boosted the sound, but they are pretty high-pitched, so might not be fully audible. This is the first time that I've ever heard birds on night migration flights. I'm quite pleased with myself for my suspicion of what they were and for identifying them. I do feel a little regretful that I've got to my age and never before noticed one of the wonders of nature going on around me. You can bet I'll be more observant at migration time in future. A few days later, I saw that past guest Jamie Wyver had created a video all about redwings and nighttime migration for the RSPB. In it, Jamie demonstrates the recording setup he used to record migrating redwings over his garden and provides more information on these winter thrushes. You can watch it on YouTube, and the link's in the show notes. I still haven't seen a redwing this winter, but I am hopeful. Oh, and speaking of Jamie, his interview with me from the Bird Fair this year is still available until the end of December. Do take a look at it and the other talks and presentations that are on the Virtual Birdfair website before they disappear. I used some of the time during lockdown to look over photographs from my previous vacations while searching for bird photos to post on my website or to use for What Bird Wednesday. While it was great looking back at the photos and reminiscing about the locations I've been lucky enough to visit and the birds I've seen, my photographs were pretty poor. I'd messed up so many opportunities to take a shareable photo. A lot of times I could remember the exact place I took the photo and the feelings and experiences of being in those locations, so I got value out of seeing the images, even if they were a bit out of focus or imperfectly composed. But I want to be able to share the photos with you too. I'm mostly a point-and-shoot photographer, just wanting to capture a record shot of what I've seen. I'm not really into creating artistic photos, but I've seen so many lovely portraits of birds recently that I would like to be able to take that kind of photo. As I've said in previous episodes, I am now trying to be more mindful of the photos I'm taking and moving away from using the presets of the camera. But when looking at these photographs taken over the past few years, I noticed there were sequences where, if only I'd reviewed the shots just taken and considered the settings I was using, I could have taken a reasonably good portrait of the bird while it was still visible. This led me to assess my own photography habits. I take pics and hope they're okay, or I think I'm taking a record shot, but later realise it could have been so much better. Part of this, I think, is because I'm nearsighted, and when I'm out walking, I wear contact lenses to correct this. Unfortunately, it means that I can't clearly see detail close up, such as whether the camera is accurately focused on the subject, or when checking my photos after I've taken a shot. However, I've just got a new camera, which has a much bigger viewing screen, which I think will make it easier to review after each photo, to ensure that the photos are in focus. And the other thing I've discovered is it's got a really helpful manual focus setting for those times when autofocus just doesn't give me what I want. It kind of puts edges around the things I'm looking at so that I know that those things are sharp. So I plan to practice with the settings and composition while photographing my garden birds. I'm so thankful that I have a few species that regularly use my garden and that they are there most days and out in the open. I'll be sharing the results with you on my website and social media channels, and I'm always open to advice and feedback on how to get better. You can contact me via mail or voice message on my website. Time to give a shout out to some of the other wonderful birding shows I've enjoyed. This autumn has seen the return of the In Conservation With series with David Lindo, the urban birder. I've enjoyed watching several of these conversations live, most recently one with Heather Wolfe, author of Birding at the Bridge, an account of watching birds on her local patch at Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York. I heard about Heather about a month after I returned from my visit to New York City in 2018. I'd been staying in Brooklyn and went birdwatching in Prospect Park, which you can hear about in episode 52, and Greenwood Cemetery, which is an upcoming episode. I would love to have gone on a birdwalk with Heather in Brooklyn Bridge Park, and I really hope I can do that in the future. She's seen over 170 species on her local patch, which really shows the value of getting to know an area and recognising the birds that visit. The replay of Heather's talk and all the other great conversations David has had this year can be found on the Urban Birders YouTube channel. And there are plenty of upcoming interviews which you can watch live for free. Sign up at David's website, theurbanbirderworld.com. While I'm on the topic of birding conversations, have you seen the Birders Show on YouTube? Chris Bell and Diego Calderon Franco interview a wide range of birding professionals, and I found it really informative and enjoyable. You can find it on YouTube at The Birders Show. And you might like to know that past guest Dan Rouse from episode 72 recently published a new book called How to Attract Birds to Your Garden. There are two versions, one for the UK and European audiences and one for the United States and Canada, with birds and advice adjusted to the different regions, with plenty of tips on wildlife gardening, how to attract the different bird species, and how to identify them when they arrive. It's a great resource for nature lovers. As ever, I've put the links for all the above in the show notes. As you probably know, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I'm particularly pleased to see so many birding podcasts being produced. It's really interesting to hear our differing perspectives and learn about the birds around the world. I've created a list of these shows on podchaser.com, so do check it out. And one of the reasons I love podcasts so much is they're very easy to listen to while doing other tasks. Do you know what? I'd love for you to post on social media right now what you're doing while you're listening to the show. Tag me in your posts. Thank you all so much for sharing your bird sightings with me. I was thrilled to receive this recording from past guest Stephanie Seymour of an afternoon break she took in her garden in October and the birds it visited.
We're listening to Carolina wrens. There we go. That's Linus the male, because I have to name everything. And that's the female, making a response. We're in Ringwood, New Jersey right now. And I'm Stephanie Seymour, your host. Just kidding, Suzy. It's a very overcast morning. We have a little bit of bird song here with the wrens. You can hear them faintly. And I also hear a little tiny call of a ruby-crowned kinglet somewhere high up in the trees, but I can't find it right now. And I hear knocking of a red-bellied woodpecker on the bark of a tree. Hear the knocking? Stop now. Okay. There's the knocking again. I just saw also a blue-headed vireo, which is a gorgeous vireo with, it looks like it has white goggles on its eyes. It's a pretty interesting looking bird. There's the knockings of the red-bellied woodpecker. I wish it would call. It has a really cool call. All right, everything just calmed down again, so we'll try this in a little while again. That's the red-bellied woodpecker calling. Oh, another one just flew across. Oh, there's a male and a female. Yep, they just both flew into the same tree together. Oh, no, I'm wrong. There's a flicker. Okay, so what's going on here? Because that's the red-bellied woodpecker. And the little flicka, flicka, flicka call you heard before was a northern flicker. But there are, in fact, two red-bellied woodpeckers because I just saw them together. So there's also a flicker somewhere around here again. Northern flickers are a type of woodpecker as well. They have gorgeous yellow under their wings. I think there's two different subspecies on the East Coast. They have yellow under their wings, and I think in the West Coast they have red under their wings. I should know, I've seen one on the West Coast and I totally forgot what it looks like. Great. All right, it's quieted down again. I'll be back. That's a Carolina wren, and it's right in my plum tree here. Let's see if he'll sing again. He's at the very top. He's at the very top, and he's singing his little heart out. The black-capped. That other call is the female responding. It's Linus, who I've named Linus, the Carolina wren, and Carol, the female, might do that. That rattly call, that's her. I mean, they make other calls, but that's just her, one of her calls responding. Both sang at the same time this time. A black-capped chickadee just flew by. And you might hear little seep-seep calls, which Those are tufted titmice. Wow, sounds like Carol's angry. That's a titmouse? It was a very birdy morning with a lot of warblers flying through and some robins flying overhead and a couple Canada geese. But it seems to... Oh, that little peak you just heard is a downy woodpecker. It's Carol again. I have to name everything. There they go. The wrens flew off. And now you're hearing the titmouse. Well, I see a few warblers flying through now, and we also had a blue-headed vireo earlier, which again I think I described this before, but he looks like he has white goggles on. It's a beautiful, beautiful, interesting-looking bird. And it's quieted down a bit. So, peace out from Ringwood, New Jersey. Pileated woodpecker calling to each other. Sounds like insane laughter to me. See, they're calling to each other. Oh, I actually see one. Oh my goodness. Okay, they're so big, pileated woodpeckers. They look like they're a foot tall. I don't really know. I gotta measure, look in the book to see how tall they really are. But they're very large. They're black and white and red. The male has a red malar stripe. The female's is black, I believe. That's how you can tell them apart. Oh, and it's the crest too, you can tell by the red on the crest. Anyway, but like the red on the crest goes all the way up, I think, for the male. I have to look that up too. I can't barely see them. They're all the way deep in the woods. I just saw one fly. Okay, that was very special to get to hear them call, and they're usually not as close here to the immediate yard. They're usually farther back in the woods, and you can hear them making a drilling call, a very deep drill call when they peck the wood. And sometimes they do like a tap, 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 tap on the wood too. That's like very deliberate and almost sounds like someone that's taking like a pick and hitting the wood with it over and over, but just like not too fast. So crazy. Anyway, that was our special bird of the day from Ringwood, New Jersey. Bye.
You can hear more from Stephanie on episode 69, where she tells us how she came to create her album, There Are Birds, with songs inspired by various bird species. Each week, I ask you to tell me about your top 5 birds or bird moments seen that week. In early November, Ben Sadek, who was in New York City, told me his top 5 for the week had been a belted kingfisher perched right next to me, looking for and eventually seeing a Virginia rail yesterday when New York City erupted in applause all round, my son spotting 2 scaup hens, one greater and one lesser, stumbling on 3 eastern bluebirds, one of them a bright male, this afternoon, and a small kettle of red-shouldered hawk over Broadway on Wednesday. Hearing about the birds that he saw in New York City reminds me how rewarding it is to look for birds wherever you are, even in a city. In October, I had a Zoom chat with some of the members of the show's Facebook group. Paul Fennick from California was part of the conversation, and we could see his garden in the background, with a beautiful blue sky and some birds fluttering around. After the call, he posted, "I'm taking it as a sign of good things to come from the Casual Birder podcast." After wrapping up the Zoom meeting, I took a moment to look over my feeders to discover a flock of 3 Cassins finch helping themselves to a sunflower seed meal. Representing the 5th Monterey County record, I'm sure they were fluttering about in the background of my Zoom screen throughout the meeting. How wonderful! That would have been a lifer for me. Not sure I can add that possible Zoom sighting to my eBird list, though. Gustavo Zoldaz recently had a rare bird find on his patch near Dublin. He'd photographed what he initially thought was a common sandpiper, but it looked a bit odd. After checking his photographs more thoroughly, it turned out to be a spotted sandpiper, a rare vagrant from North America on the east coast in Dublin, and only the 3rd record for that area. On the topic of unexpected species, Mary Chan, host of the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice, recently saw a common pochard off Vancouver Island.
Hi, Suzy. This is Mary Chan of the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice, and I wanted to let you know about the rare duck sighting in my neighborhood. I live in Victoria, BC, Canada, which is all the way on the west coast of Canada on a big island just outside of Vancouver. And we were told in the news that there was a pochard in North America, which I think is the first one in Canada. Maybe that's what the news article said. And it turns out it's just a 5-minute car ride away from my house. And so we took the 5-year-old there to look for this rare duck because we love looking for ducks. But unfortunately, it is living in a reservoir. I don't know if it's living there, but that's where it was sighted. And the reservoir is fenced off and it's a pretty big space. So when we did see the duck, it was quite far away from where we were. We did have a pair of binoculars, not strong ones, but they were good enough that we could take a look and notice, oh yeah, there were these red-headed ducks. And also, unknown to my family, I've never seen a red-headed duck before, and that was actually a breed. And so we looked, and there were, I think, 3 red-headed ducks. But then I noticed this other duck that had more of a paler gray body. It was more white in comparison to these other 2 red-headed ducks. And that's when I thought, this must be the pochard. And then I looked harder and I noticed there was a slight difference in the bill. And that was really about it. But I was just assuming, I don't know, was that the one? I was assuming it was the one. But next to me was a man with a long telephoto lens for his camera. And so I just asked, I'm like, is that the duck, the one more in the center where we were looking? And he said, yeah, the one that's diving, the one that just dove as we were watching. And he said, that is the duck. And I was pretty happy to see it. And it was a beautiful day out. It's been rainy and windy here a lot, but on this beautiful day, there were quite a few families and little people out too watching for this duck. And so a little more crowded than we would have liked at the reservoir. However, it was just nice to see. So I hope that other birders are able to go out and see it in my neighborhood. Of course, socially distant in this COVID era. But yes, our very first recorded sighting of a pochard in BC, maybe all of Canada.
Following Mary's recording, I learned the differences between redhead and common pochard. Both ducks look very similar, with a red head and neck, black breast, grey back and sides, and black tail. Redheads have a pale grey bill with black tip and yellowish eyes. Common pochards have a grey bill with a black tip and a pale grey area near the black tip, and has red eyes, and their geographic range doesn't usually overlap. I imagine it would be quite difficult to tell them apart at a distance without the help of a scope. I hope that common pochard is doing well and either finds its way home or settles into its new community. If you have an update on how the common pochard is doing, I'd love to hear it. Do let me know what birds you're seeing. You can now leave me email or a voice message on my website, casualbirder.com. Voice messages are made through SpeakPipe, which is free to use. You can tell me all about your wild bird sightings, and your recording might even appear on the show. The voice calls are limited to 90 seconds in length. If you want to send me a longer voice message, you can always send me a voice message attached to an email. Remember, you can support the show by buying me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com or by talking about the show on social media and spreading the word. And if you're on Facebook, do join us in the Casual Birder Facebook group. It's a very friendly group, and we love to hear about the birds you see. We'll be holding another group birdwatch at the end of December. Maybe you'd like to take part with us. The Facebook group is a closed one, and you will be asked a couple of very easy questions when you apply to join. These are just to ensure that you are a listener to the show and that you'll abide by the group rules. Do remember to check out the show notes for all the links mentioned in this week's episode. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen, and all it means is that when a new episode comes out, your device will download it. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.